Back to reality, my friends. This is what we're used to. And I'm smiling, but it's only because I don't want to cry.
I feel like I let my teammates down tonight.
Your emotion.
Can't win with 5 turnovers. I fumbled twice, threw 2 picks. When you shoot yourself in the foot like that, you don't deserve to win football games.
Back to reality. That's the phrase echoing through Buffalo right now. Not because the season ended, but because how it ended reopened every scar Bills fans thought had finally healed. In one brutal night, hope turned into heartbreak, belief turned into doubt, and one of the NFL's brightest stars found himself standing at a podium fighting tears, carrying the weight of an entire franchise on his shoulders. Josh Allen didn't dodge responsibility. He didn't deflect. He didn't blame the refs, the injuries, or the chaos that unfolded around him. Instead, he did something that shocked the football world. He took all the blame. He said he let his teammates down, and the internet hasn't stopped arguing since. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just another playoff loss. This was a referendum on Josh Allen, on the Bills, on whether elite talent without flawless execution can ever be enough in January. 5 turnovers, 5, in a playoff game. And yet, Buffalo still had a chance to win. That's what makes this sting different. That's what makes this moment explode across social media, talk shows, and locker rooms. The post-game interview went viral in minutes. Allen's voice cracked. His words landed heavy. Fans saw a leader crushed by accountability. Critics saw confirmation of a pattern they've been whispering about for years. A quarterback who can do everything, except protect himself from the very aggression that makes him special. But then came the moment that truly lit the match. When teammates were asked how they felt about Allen saying he let them down, the response wasn't comforting. It wasn't supportive. It was cold. And that single exchange turned sympathy into scrutiny overnight. Now the questions are unavoidable. Is Josh Allen too reckless to win when it matters most? Is Buffalo stuck in an endless loop of almost? And at what point does heartbreak stop being bad luck and start becoming identity? This isn't about one throw, or one fumble, or one controversial call in overtime. This is about 6 years of rising expectations crashing into the same wall, again, and again, and again. Because in the NFL, talent earns headlines, but decisions decide legacies. And right now, Josh Allen's legacy is standing at a crossroads with the entire football world watching, waiting to see which version of him shows up next. The game itself felt cursed from the opening drive. Nothing about it followed a normal playoff script. Momentum swung violently. Big plays were immediately answered by catastrophic mistakes, and by the time the final whistle blew, it felt less like a loss and more like emotional exhaustion. Buffalo didn't just lose this game, they handed pieces of it away. 5 turnovers in a playoff game is almost unheard of. Not 1, not 2, 5, 2 fumbles, 2 interceptions, and 1 final controversial call that ended everything. And yet somehow, unbelievably, the Bills were still alive late, still fighting, still within striking distance. That's the part that makes this sting worse. Because despite the chaos, despite repeatedly shooting themselves in the foot, Buffalo still scored 30 points. They still pushed the game to overtime. They still had a chance to win. And that's where Josh Allen's night becomes impossible to simplify.
Can't win with 5 turnovers. I fumbled twice, threw 2 picks. When you shoot yourself in the foot like that, you don't deserve to win football games.
On one drive, he looked unstoppable, escaping pressure, extending plays, throwing darts on the run that very few quarterbacks in the league can even attempt. On the next, he looked reckless, forcing throws, holding the ball too long, trying to be the hero when the moment demanded restraint. That duality defined the entire night. The most painful sequence came right before halftime, 13 seconds left, no timeouts. The Bills were set to head into the locker room down 1 score, with momentum still within reach. Instead, Allen scrambled, exposed the ball, and got stripped. Denver capitalized immediately. What should have been a manageable deficit became a psychological gut punch. That wasn't bad luck. That wasn't officiating. That was a decision. And in the playoffs, decisions echo louder than talent. By overtime, the stadium felt tense, not electric. Every snap carried weight. Every whistle felt suspicious. And when the game finally ended on a call that split the internet in half, the reaction was instant fury. But even in that moment, Allen didn't explode. He didn't deflect. He didn't blame. He internalized everything. And that choice to carry it all is what turned this loss from painful into something far more complicated. Because the moment the quarterback takes all the blame, everyone else gets to step back and ask a dangerous question. What does that say about the team around him? But that wasn't the conversation yet, because what happened next shifted everything. The game was over, but the real moment hadn't happened yet. Still in uniform, eyes red, voice barely steady, Josh Allen stepped in front of the cameras. No scripted lines, no polished cliches, just raw emotion. And within seconds, the internet froze. "I feel like I let my teammates down tonight." That sentence detonated across NFL media. Because this wasn't a quarterback hiding. This wasn't a leader dodging responsibility. This was the face of a franchise placing the entire loss on his own shoulders, publicly, painfully, and without hesitation. For some fans, it was admirable. Leadership, accountability, the kind of honesty you don't often hear after a playoff collapse. But for others, it was alarming. Because when your franchise quarterback sounds broken, not frustrated, not angry, but genuinely wounded, that hits differently. Allen had just thrown for over 250 yards. He had powered Buffalo back from deficits. He had taken hit after hit, extending plays that shouldn't exist. And yet, there he was, apologizing. That's when the conversation shifted. Reporters turned to the locker room and asked the obvious follow-up. How do teammates react when their quarterback says he let them down? The answer landed like a slap. He let us down. No clarification, no cushioning, no rush to defend him. The clip spread instantly. Fans replayed it in disbelief. Analysts paused, and suddenly the narrative cracked wide open. Was this brutal honesty, or a locker room fracture showing itself at the worst possible moment? Because context matters. Josh Allen is the reason Buffalo has been relevant for half a decade. He's the reason playoff football exists in January. He's the reason Bills Mafia believes every season. And yet, in that moment, it felt like the weight he'd been carrying alone had finally become visible. And here, where things get uncomfortable. Allen didn't push back, he didn't look surprised, he didn't bristle, he accepted it. That's when accountability stops being inspirational and starts becoming isolating. Because leadership isn't just about owning mistakes, it's about trust. And when the public sees even a hint that the locker room might not fully rally behind its leader, the entire foundation gets questioned. Was that response emotion in the heat of the moment? Or was it something deeper finally slipping through the cracks? Either way, the damage was done. The interview didn't just go viral because Allen was emotional. It went viral because it exposed something rarely seen in real time. A superstar quarterback confronting failure without armor. And once that happens, every mistake from the game gets replayed under a microscope. Every turnover, every missed throw, every decision. Because when you open the door and say, "This is on me," the league will walk straight through it. And that's exactly what happened next. If you strip away the emotion and just watch the tape, Josh Allen's performance becomes one of the strangest playoff games of his career. At his best, he was sensational. He made throws that defy coaching logic, sidearm lasers under pressure, deep shots on broken plays, scrambles that turned dead downs into first downs. For long stretches, Denver had no answer when Allen was improvising. He kept Buffalo alive almost through sheer force of will. And yet the mistakes were brutal. 2 interceptions that came from forcing windows that weren't there. 2 fumbles, one of them at a moment where protecting the ball mattered more than gaining extra yards. These weren't fluke bounces. They were the direct result of aggression crossing the line into recklessness. That's the paradox of Josh Allen. The same mentality that makes him elite is the same one that can derail everything. The most damaging moment came before halftime. 13 seconds left, no timeouts, a chance to walk off the field, regroup, and come out swinging after the break. Instead, Allen scrambled, kept the ball loose, and got stripped. Denver didn't hesitate. Field goal, momentum gone. That single play changed the entire texture of the game. And then there were the missed chances. A third down throw to Dalton Kincaid late in regulation, open, clean, inches away from being a touchdown. Overthrown, not by much, but in the playoffs, inches decide seasons. Analysts later counted at least 4 throws that Allen normally completes. Not bad reads, not panic throws, just slight misfires at the worst possible times. That's what separates great from legendary. It's not about highlight reels. It's about precision when the margin disappears. Allen knew it too. When asked about his performance, he didn't hide. Can't win with 5 turnovers. No excuses, no deflection. But here's the problem with that statement. Yes, 5 turnovers are unacceptable, but Buffalo still scored 30 points. They still forced overtime. They still had a path to win despite the chaos. That doesn't happen without Allen. Which raises the question no one wants to answer out loud. If the quarterback has to be perfect for this team to survive, what does that say about everything else? Because the deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. This loss wasn't just about Allen being too aggressive. It was about a roster stretched thin, a margin for error that no longer exists, and a quarterback trying to compensate for it all, sometimes successfully, sometimes disastrously. And when the dust settled, the numbers told a story that felt impossible to ignore. Because this wasn't just one loss, it fit a pattern. At some point, every superstar quarterback reaches a moment where the conversation shifts. Not from talent to legacy, from potential to results. And for Josh Allen, that moment may have already arrived. The numbers are uncomfortable. 5 wins, 6 losses in the playoffs, 0 wins in overtime games, 3 postseason overtime exits. These aren't cherry-picked stats. They're outcomes stacked on top of each other, season after season, in the same moments under the same pressure. That's when coincidence quietly turns into a pattern. And that's why this loss hit differently. Because this wasn't a young quarterback learning on the fly. This wasn't an underdog overachieving. This was supposed to be the year. The AFC felt vulnerable, no dominant dynasty looming. The window was wide open, and Buffalo still walked out early. Again, what makes it even harder to process is that Allen didn't disappear. He didn't shrink. He didn't get rattled. He fought back. He dragged the Bills into overtime despite every possible obstacle. But that's also the contradiction that's now haunting his career. Josh Allen is good enough to keep Buffalo alive in games they shouldn't survive, but not clean enough to finish them when it matters most. Overtime tells that story perfectly. In 7 career overtime games, Allen has never walked away with a win. Not once. Different defenses, different coordinators, different rosters, same ending. A final mistake, a missed opportunity, a game-ending moment that doesn't go Buffalo's way. Fans want to blame bad luck, refs, coin tosses, circumstances. But the league doesn't operate on sympathy. At this level, quarterbacks are judged by what happens when everything is on the line and nothing goes according to plan. And fair or not, Allen's resume is starting to feel heavy in those moments. That's why his post-game interview cuts so deep. Because he knows it. You could hear it in his voice. the exhaustion, the weight, the realization that being almost isn't enough anymore. Not for him, not for the city, not for a franchise starving for something real. This wasn't frustration, it was wear. And that's dangerous. Because when a quarterback starts carrying not just the offense, but the expectations, the history, and the heartbreak of an entire fan base, the margin for error shrinks even more. Which leads to the hardest question Buffalo now has to face. Not whether Josh Allen is elite, but whether the way he plays, the risks, the aggression, the chaos, can ever truly survive January football. And that question doesn't have an easy answer. Because the next section goes beyond numbers, it goes straight to identity. What made this moment explode across the internet wasn't the stat line. It wasn't the turnovers. It was the way Josh Allen carried the loss like it was his alone. When he stood in front of the cameras, voice cracking, eyes glassy, and said he felt like he let his teammates down, it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded heavy. The kind of heavy that comes from knowing you gave everything and still came up short. That's leadership. But leadership can turn into self-destruction if it isn't balanced. Allen has become the emotional core of Buffalo, not just the quarterback, not just the face of the franchise. He's the hope, the belief, the reason Bills fans show up every year convinced this time will be different. And that's a dangerous place for one player to live. Because when things go wrong, there's nowhere to hide. The reaction from teammates only amplified that tension. One answer in particular, cold, blunt, and unfiltered, sent shockwaves through social media. Whether it was frustration, honesty, or exhaustion, it revealed something deeper than the loss itself. This locker room is tired of coming up short. Not tired of Josh Allen. Tired of the ending. And that distinction matters. No one questions Allen's toughness. No one questions his work ethic. No one questions whether he cares. If anything, he cares too much. He absorbs blame even when the roster around him is thin, injured, or inconsistent. Buffalo asked him to be everything. Quarterback, leader, closer, savior. And on nights like this, when the margin is razor thin, that burden shows. You could see it when he talked about loving his teammates, when he apologized instead of deflecting, when he avoided blaming officials even though the calls were questionable. That restraint isn't weakness, it's awareness. But awareness doesn't stop the criticism. Because leadership without championships eventually turns into scrutiny. The city feels it, the fan base feels it, and Allen feels it more than anyone. This wasn't a meltdown. It was a man processing another ending he can't escape. And now the conversation has shifted again. Not about whether Josh Allen belongs among the league's best, but about whether Buffalo has asked him to carry something no quarterback can sustain alone. Because the next chapter isn't about film study or mechanics. It's about decisions by the front office, the coaching staff, and the organization itself. And those decisions will determine whether this moment becomes a breaking point, or the turning point everyone keeps waiting for. There's a reason this loss hit differently than the others. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was familiarity. 5 turnovers in a playoff game is the kind of number that usually ends things early. Blowout, collapse, no debate. And yet Buffalo was still there, still alive, still one play away. That contradiction is exactly what defines the Josh Allen era. Because Josh Allen is both the reason the Bills survive chaos and the reason chaos keeps showing up. The fumbles, the picks, the aggressive scrambles at the worst possible moments. None of this is new. It's the tax that comes with a quarterback who refuses to play small. Allen doesn't manage games, he attacks them. And most weeks, that's why Buffalo wins. But January doesn't forgive habits. That late half turnover before halftime wasn't about pressure or bad luck. It was about instinct. 13 seconds left. No timeouts. Field position doesn't matter. And yet, Allen tried to do more. He always does. That's the same trait that makes him special and the same one that keeps burning him when margins disappear. What's frustrating for fans and analysts alike is that the blueprint is obvious. The talent gap isn't the problem. The arm talent is elite. The mobility is rare. The leadership is unquestioned. The issue is control. Not suppressing aggression, mastering it. Because in the postseason, one reckless moment doesn't just cost yards. It flips momentum. It gives life to opponents who shouldn't still be breathing. And Buffalo keeps handing out oxygen. The overtime record tells the story nobody wants to say out loud. Winless. Not because Allen shrinks, but because chaos favors no one. And Buffalo has made chaos their brand. That's why this debate refuses to die. Not is Josh Allen great, but can Josh Allen evolve? Every Super Bowl quarterback had to learn this lesson. The moment when raw dominance had to be refined, when knowing when not to make a play mattered more than making one. And that's the crossroads Buffalo is standing at right now. Because the margin between legacy and regret isn't talent anymore. It's discipline. And until that changes, until the Bills stop asking Allen to be Superman on every snap, this story risks repeating itself with different opponents and the same ending. The window isn't closed yet, but it's no longer wide open. And everyone in Buffalo knows it. At some point, every franchise has to stop asking what went wrong and start asking what this actually is. Because this wasn't a fluke loss. It wasn't bad luck. And it wasn't just the refs. It was a familiar ending, wearing a different jersey. The numbers are uncomfortable, but they matter. Josh Allen's playoff record, his overtime losses, the repeated pattern of Buffalo getting close enough to taste it only to walk away empty-handed. At first, those moments felt cruel. Then they felt frustrating. Now they feel revealing. Not because Allen can't win, but because the margin for error around him is razor thin, and Buffalo keeps living on the edge. This roster has been built to survive chaos instead of eliminate it. The offense asks Allen to create instead of execute. The system depends on improvisation instead of insulation. And when things break down, everyone looks to the same guy to fix it. That works in October. It fails in January. The scary part for the Bills isn't that Allen played poorly. It's that even with 5 turnovers, even with controversial calls, even with injuries piling up, Buffalo still had chances. Real chances. The kind elite teams convert. And they didn't. That's why this offseason feels heavier than the others. There's no obvious villain to blame, no single move to undo, no easy fix to point at. The front office has to decide whether this core needs reinforcement or redefinition. Do you keep leaning into Allen's aggression and hope the odds finally break your way? Or do you finally build an environment that protects him from himself? Because the truth nobody wants to admit is this: Josh Allen has been asked to be perfect in imperfect conditions, and perfection doesn't exist in the playoffs. The league isn't questioning his talent anymore. That debate is over. The only thing left is whether Buffalo can evolve fast enough before time makes the decision for them. This loss didn't end a season. It forced a reckoning. And the next move the Bills make won't just shape their roster. It will define Josh Allen's legacy. That's the weight hanging over Buffalo right now. And it's heavier than any interception. This is the part of the story where emotions fade and reality settles in. Josh Allen isn't a fraud. He isn't overrated. And this loss doesn't erase what he's built. But it does sharpen the question that's been hovering over Buffalo for years. How long can greatness survive without evolution? Allen's postgame words didn't go viral because he played badly. They went viral because people recognized the weight behind them. a quarterback who knows the window doesn't stay open forever, a leader who understands that talent alone doesn't guarantee outcomes, a franchise face realizing that apologies don't move banners. Buffalo has lived in the space between hope and heartbreak for too long, close enough to believe, far enough to suffer. Every season ends with the same phrase, "We'll fix it next year." And every January proves how unforgiving that mindset really is. This loss didn't expose Josh Allen. It exposed the system around him. A system that asks him to be reckless and flawless at the same time. A roster that relies on heroics instead of structure. A team that keeps gambling on chaos and hopping discipline shows up when it matters most. The NFL doesn't reward effort. It doesn't reward emotion. And it doesn't reward almost. It rewards teams that remove pressure instead of amplifying it. Josh Allen will be back. He'll work. He'll reflect. He'll carry it with him because that's who he is. The real question is whether Buffalo finally meets him halfway. Because if the Bills don't change, this moment won't be remembered as a turning point. It'll be remembered as a warning. And the most dangerous thing in the NFL isn't failure. It's repeating it long enough that it becomes identity.